Yi Huan opened her eyes and realized that she had worn clothes in an era where there was a shortage of medicine and it was difficult to eat enough. She even became the wrong daughter in her arms. Fortunately, in her previous life, by chance, she obtained a space with a small spiritual spring eye inside. Yi Huan desperately collected supplies because the world was about to change. After crossing the river, although my mother had a bad attitude towards me at first, she had a loving father, a humble and gentlemanly elder brother, a gentle and silent second brother, and a face-saving younger brother. Afterwards, memories began to mix up, but there was family to take care of outside, and inside there was a body of strength and a space filled with supplies. Afterwards, they also met a caring and powerful partner. Even if they encountered various difficulties later on, the couple never thought of abandoning each other. They worked together to overcome various difficulties and spent a lifetime together. Keywords of the novel. Wearing space to become a true daughter without pop-ups, wearing space to become a true daughter with a full collection download, wearing space to become a true daughter with the latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Crossing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Crossing. Yi Huan suddenly opened his eyes, only to find himself on a creaking train. Yi Huan wanted to get up and check her current situation, but found that she couldn't move at all. Yi Huan broke out in a cold sweat in an instant. The more she couldn't move, the more she had to resist. Little did she know that with just one force, her eyes turned black and she became unconscious. Many people were talking below, but no one noticed that something was wrong with Yi Huan. Yi Huan felt as if she had been using someone else's perspective for over a decade at lightning speed. Yi Huan also learned about her current situation in her dream. This body is called Yi Huan, although they have the same name and surname, their experiences are completely different. Modern Yi Huan has been greatly favored and has been carefree since childhood. However, this Yi Huan has lived a pitiful life. I started working without a day's rest since I became sensible. As I grew older, my strength grew stronger and I gradually started working hard. Despite being a small and thin girl, my family treated her as an adult. I wake up earlier than chickens, sleep later than dogs, and eat the least at home. When Yi Huan saw it, she wanted to scold her hard. How could there be such a foolish person? Yi Huan knew from her perspective that she longed for the love of her family, but Yi Huan only saw their heartlessness. There is not only Yi Huan in this family. Although she has an older sister and 2 younger brothers, Yi Huan does more work than they all add up. Unexpectedly, one day a woman came knocking on her door, and Yi Huan realized that she was from the Yi family in the capital city. It was because she had held the wrong baby in the hospital that she had exchanged lives with another girl. Yi Huan was momentarily stunned upon hearing this news and didn't know what to do. Before she could even figure it out, the mother of this body talked to her all night. Anyway, Yi Huan didn't want to remember anymore, and she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to hold back when the time came. I had always longed for the love of my parents, but suddenly I heard my mother say this to her. She was frightened, anxious, and mixed with various emotions. Her already malnourished body could no longer bear it. So Yi Huan came and saw the girl's situation. Yi Huan didn't know what to do, after all, there was no one left. Yi Huan whispered in her heart and didn't respond for a while. No matter how hard she didn't believe it, she knew she had really left. Yi Huan unconsciously shed a tear and could only wish her a loving family and a harmonious and beautiful life in the future. When Yi Huan regained consciousness, her headache became even more pronounced. She struggled to turn her body and secretly took a pill in an undiscovered area. Yi Huan closed her eyes, tightly closed her mouth, and struggled to swallow the pill. The crying of the pill quickly spread from the tip of the tongue to the brain, and Yi Huan unconsciously shed tears. Swearing in her heart, she vowed to strengthen her body and never take medicine again after she passed this hurdle. Due to her poor health when she was a child, Yi Huan took a lot of medicine, which resulted in a bad impression of the pills. In addition, after strengthening her body, she usually either drinks plenty of hot water to get through a minor cold or drinks some non-bitter granules. Huan knows how ugly her expression is now without looking in the mirror. In order to improve the medicinal effect, she drank another drop of spring water, only one drop, not more. After all, drinking too much spring water has an adverse effect, and her body cannot bear it. But the spring water couldn't relieve the bitterness of the pill, so Huan could only swallow her saliva vigorously. After taking the medicine, it was possible that the effects of spring water and pills had taken effect. Huan felt her eyelids getting heavier and her head getting dizzy. She couldn't bear it anymore and fainted again. When Huan woke up again, although her head was not as painful as at first, her whole body was soft and fluffy, completely unable to exert any force. Unfortunately, Huan's stomach was so hungry that she struggled to pinch herself. The pain gave her some strength. Huan propped up her body and looked down at a woman eating below, shouting with some difficulty, "Aunt Wu, do you still have anything to eat?" Because Huan's voice was too low, in fact, it was like a mosquito chirping, and no one else heard her voice at all. The person across from her noticed her and asked, "Are you okay?" Huan licked her dry lips and said a little louder, "It's much better, just so hungry." His words successfully caught the attention of others, and the woman who was previously called Aunt Wu also raised her head. After seeing Huan standing up, Aunt Wu patted her thigh and said, "Oh, are you hungry?" Huan nodded. Aunt Wu said anxiously, "Wait, I'll get you some congee." Huan didn't know where she was going to make congee for herself, but she also knew that she would try to eat light food now. After drinking congee, Huan obviously felt that her strength had recovered. Huan learned from her original appearance and timidly thanked her. Aunt Wu looked at Huan's thin and weak appearance and felt a little distressed. She looked up and said, "When I go get some hot water, I'll heat up the eggs for you. How much will you eat later?" Huan nodded and said, "Thank you, Aunt Wu." Huan's polite appearance made Aunt Wu a bit uncomfortable, so she could only say, "You should lie down for a while longer. I'll call you when the eggs are ready." Huan nodded obediently. Looking at the obedient Huan, Aunt Wu felt a bit embarrassed and lowered her head, feeling a little more pity for her. "Oh, what a great child. Why is your luck so bad?" "No, after going back, make sure they talk." Afterwards, with the help of medication and spring water, Huan's body also improved. Of course, Huan also consciously controlled the speed of recovery. After all, being too good and too fast can easily lead to suspicion. In the next 2 days, Huan took advantage of the time when she went to the bathroom and scrutinized her appearance. Huan was surprised to find that her physical appearance was 8 or 9 times similar to her previous life. Huan couldn't believe it, pulling at the skin and meager flesh on her face. "Because my original body was too thin, coupled with a serious illness before, my face is now covered in thick fatigue, and I just look like a child without much energy. Exercise should not be rushed for a while, the most important thing is to take good care of your body first." Huan avoided people and ate a lot of nutritious food in the restroom. Despite the unpleasant smell of the restroom, the most hidden thing on the entire train now is the restroom. After devouring some less flavorful snacks, Huan began to carefully check if there were any exposed parts. Because of her strong physical strength, she also ate a lot, and now that she has become her own, she naturally won't treat herself unfairly. With Aunt Wu's daily staple food and Huan's storage, Huan's performance in the past 2 days has visibly improved. The people inside the carriage thought it was just a big change for women and a good recovery for children, but they didn't think too much about it. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Worries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Worries. 3 days later, the train finally stopped in the capital. I stayed on the train for 3 whole days. Although they were bunks, Huan couldn't make any big moves because there were many people around. Moreover, the train was mixed with fish and dragons, and the smell was really unpleasant. The first thing Huan did after getting off the train was to take a deep breath of fresh air. Aunt Wu looked at her with some concern and said, "Are you feeling a bit uncomfortable?" Huan nodded and said, "The smell on the train is not good." Aunt Wu said calmly, "Nowadays trains are like this, we can only get used to it." Huan also knew she had no choice and nodded. Aunt Wu saw that her lips had turned white, and after some thought, she took her to a nearby state-owned restaurant to have something to eat. Huan followed behind her and began to look at the current capital. Looking at the familiar yet unfamiliar capital, Huan didn't know how she felt at this moment. The winter in the capital is relatively dry, and with no haze from later generations, the sky in the capital looks less oppressive than in later generations. The road at this time was vastly different from that of later generations. Although Huan had lived in the capital for several years, she still couldn't recognize where she was now. In this moment, Huan still felt a bit confused. There's no way, in order not to get lost, Huan can only follow Aunt Wu honestly. Aunt Wu, who was familiar with the way, led Huan into the nearest state-owned restaurant and said straightforwardly to the girl behind the counter, "Comrade, do you have dumplings available today?" "Hello, comrade, pickled Chinese cabbage dumplings and mushroom dumplings are specially served today. Which do you want?" Aunt Wu glanced at Huan. Huan whispered, "How delicious are pickled Chinese cabbage dumplings." Aunt Wu glanced at the chef cooking in the kitchen and then looked at Huan, who was not half as fat as the chef, and couldn't help but feel a little more pity for her. Aunt Wu said arrogantly, "Comrade, could you please have 3 liang of each type of dumplings?" The waiter looked at the two customers who were fat and thin with some differences and said, "Our dumplings are about 8 in 1 or 2, and each one has a thin and sunken skin. If you want 6 liang, there will be about 50. Comrade, it's shameful to waste." Aunt Wu has also seen Huan's appetite these past few days and learned about her tragic life before. Now that she is finally going to live a good life, what's wrong with the 6 liang dumplings? Isn't it that you can't afford it? Isn't it that I can't finish it all? Seeing her so persistent, the waiter stopped persuading her and issued a ticket for them to pay. When Aunt Wu went out, she brought a stack of money and tickets, counted out a few and handed them to the waiter. Aunt Wu and Huan casually picked a seat and sat down. Huan was a bit curious about the current state-owned restaurant. After all, it seemed like she had only seen it in TV dramas, and now it feels quite strange. Aunt Wu watched as Huan stared at the window, and unconsciously sighed in her heart. This young girl, who was only in her teens, why did she encounter such a tragic thing? A life that should have been carefree, but it's really pitiful to have suffered so much because of one mistake. Soon their dumplings were ready, and the waiter placed 2 large bowls directly on the counter and shouted, "Whose dumplings with 2 different fillings?" Upon hearing the commotion, Aunt Wu felt as if she had stood up to pick it up. Huan couldn't help but feel a bit surprised. It turned out that the state-owned restaurants during this period, as mentioned in her childhood, all needed to be picked up by herself. It turned out to be true. Huan looked at the 2 large bowls of dumplings in front of her, smelling a faint aroma wafting by. Perhaps this body had been hungry for too long, and unconsciously began to secrete a large amount of saliva in her mouth. Aunt Wu placed the small bowl in front of Huan and said, "Don't be polite, eat quickly. Your parents are very concerned about you and have given me enough money. You can rest assured to eat." Huan can't bear it anymore. She hasn't eaten meat since she came over, and now she's really greedy. In fact, she has stocked up a lot of raw meat and cooked meat in her space, but there are many people on the train, so she is completely afraid to try. After all, the idea of traveling may sound absurd, but it's hard to resist the possibility that someone might guess the truth. Huan used to read novels and also read about the fate of characters exposed in books. Although it wasn't very tragic, at least she was still monitored every day and had no freedom at all. Huan doesn't feel like she can tolerate that kind of life, so she has always endured not eating strong-tasting snacks on the train. She chooses snacks that can be solved in one bite without leaving any residue or strong taste. The more she thought, the more hungry Huan became. Seeing that Aunt Wu wanted to give her a spoon, she quickly refused and took 10 spoons in one go. 10 of them were still Huan's previous appetite. Aunt Wu thought she was embarrassed when she saw them. After all, she had inquired about many things when she went to pick them up. Aunt Wu couldn't help feeling a little sad when she saw her sensible appearance, afraid that tears would fall. She quickly took a handkerchief to wash away her tears. Huan blew, and once the temperature was confirmed, she took a bite and half of the dumplings were gone. Huan has never eaten dumplings filled with pickled Chinese cabbage in her previous life. After all, she grew up in the South when she was a child. There is really no pickled Chinese cabbage in the dumplings there. There are pork, cabbage, pork, corn, cold potatoes and pork. Even if she moves later, she still keeps this habit. How to put it, the taste is a bit strange, but the slightly sour taste has greatly eased her current mood and state, and the dumpling filling is juicy, which is the kind of explosive juice state. Just as Huan took a bite, she almost got her clothes dirty. Later, Huan ate dumplings filled with shiitake mushrooms. Shiitake mushrooms are the type of shiitake mushrooms that are dried in the sun and then soaked, and they have a unique aroma. Even if they are chopped now, the mixture with pork adds a more fragrant flavor to the pork. Huan ate a bit too much, but it looked very gentle and didn't seem to wolf down at all. Huan occasionally drinks dumpling soup, which turns into raw food. Recently, Huan and Aunt Wu have just finished these 6 liang dumplings. After eating and drinking enough, Huan felt a bit lazy all over. She touched her stomach, which had not changed at all. Huan unconsciously worried that the material she had collected might not be enough for her to eat. After all, my appetite now is 3 or 4 times that of before. However, thinking about purchasing from all over the world before, thinking about the beef and mutton I had eaten in Inner Mongolia, the fruits and melons I had eaten in XJ, the seafood I had eaten in Qingdao, the river fresh food I had eaten in Poyang Lake, the large quantities of vegetables I had purchased at the vegetable base, seeing herds of big pigs on the farm, and the supplies from the 2 warehouses I purchased in Yiwu, Huan felt a little relieved. After all, she had spent so much money, she couldn't afford to keep herself alive. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Going Home. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Going home. After dinner, Aunt Wu and Huan walked to a large courtyard. Huan looked at the soldiers standing guard at the door and began to guess the identities of his cheap parents. After all, the soldiers on guard could infer that they should have some status. Huanxin couldn't say what she felt inside. After all, she was her original parents, but now her original body is no longer there. Moreover, based on what I noticed in my previous reading of novels, in this era of urban housing shortage, it is common for more than 10 people to squeeze into a house of several tens of square meters. Unless the unit divides the house after work, or the home is really unable to accommodate it, few people move out to live. Aunt Wu didn't notice Huan's trance, so she explained the situation to the soldiers and waited for them to register. After all, this courtyard was too crowded to enter. Others glanced at Huan, looking at her frail body and unconsciously feeling sorry for her. How could a good person be held in the wrong place? Originally, this matter couldn't be concealed. Huan's father's position was discovered and he reported it early in the morning. Some good people spread the news. Within a few days, almost every household in the courtyard had heard of this incident, so many people began to doubt whether it would also happen in their own homes. The hospital affiliated with the courtyard conducted a detailed examination of all previous information in order to prove its innocence, and also had conversations with doctors and nurses. Obstetric nurses added a lot of work to this, but no one dared to raise objections at this time. Afterwards, it is important to ensure that at least 2 people are present at each delivery to prevent such incidents from occurring in their hospital. After all, it is not easy for people to have children in this hospital, and the consequences of confusing their bloodlines are incalculable. Yi Huan could feel the pity in the eyes of those around her, so she didn't want to say anything and continued to play the role of her original silent state with her head down. After registering, Aunt Wu couldn't wait to take Yi Huan inside. While walking, he also talked to Yi Huan about the rules of the courtyard, such as not walking around randomly, which places cannot be visited, which children are more mischievous and should be avoided, and some of the neighbors' temperaments and habits. Yi Huan listened attentively. After all, it's not realistic to move out in recent years unless she finds a job and her employer shares a house. But Yi Huan knew that dividing houses was not so easy. Little did she know that nowadays there are fewer houses and more people, and even single dormitories are in high demand. I quickly arrived at the house where the Yi family was located. The house was not big, only 2 stories long, and even looked a bit simple on the outside. However, the surrounding houses seemed to be similar, with possible differences in floor area and number of floors. There is a small garden in front of the house, where many flowers are planted, which are common flowers and plants in daily life. It is now spring, and the flowers and plants are flourishing. Aunt Wu knocked on the door, and soon someone came to open it. Yi Huan looked up at the person who opened the door. The young man inside the house frowned as soon as he saw Yi Huan's appearance. Aunt Wu saw it and shouted, "Minghui, why are you here to open the door?" Yi Minghui stared at Yi Huan and said, "Xiao Hui was scolded by his parents and didn't have time to come and open the door." Aunt Wu saw that Minghui had been staring at Yi Huan all along, and her heart was not satisfied either. After all, she had been working in this family for so long. "You said it was okay, how could this happen?" Aunt Wu didn't look like they had been standing silent all along. After all, she noticed that people had started to stand around the house. How could she make outsiders laugh? Aunt Wu quickly pulled Yi Huan in with her sharp eyes and closed the door, blocking the view of outsiders. Yi Minghui looked at Yi Huan, who was bowing his head and not speaking, and felt uncomfortable inside. After all, anyone who told his sister that they had suffered so much outside would feel uncomfortable. Yi Minghui felt a little sorry for Yi Huan's self-introduction and said, "I'm your big brother, my name is Yi Minghui. You can come to me for anything at home in the future." Yi Huan calmly followed the young man with a slight nervousness. Aunt Wu knew that she didn't need her in the living room for the time being, so she whispered to Yi Huan, "Don't be afraid." After that, she entered the kitchen and had been away for a few days, not knowing how the people at home were doing. "Yi Huan, this child has just arrived. Seeing how thin she looks, we still need to make her a delicious tonic, otherwise we are afraid that a gust of wind will blow her away." Yi Huan lowered her head and thought about something, but without paying attention, she directly bumped into Yi Mingji's back. Yi Huan took a step back with some embarrassment. Yi Mingji stepped aside and saw several people not far away. Yi Huan's heart began to beat violently unconsciously, and she guessed that it might be a remnant of her original emotions. After all, due to her adoptive mother's words and constant overwork, she died of illness on the way to see her family. If it were for herself, how could she not get through this hurdle? Originally, Yi Huan felt very guilty about taking someone else's body. What's different from a bandit? Although Yi Huan wants to come back to life, if it is based on the sacrifice of others, Yi Huan does not want to have this opportunity. Yi Huan didn't know if she was right or wrong, but at that moment, she suddenly felt like a despicable thief, the kind of person she used to dislike. The people present stared blankly at them, each with a different expression. Yi Weiguo walked over excitedly and looked at Yi Huan, saying, "I'm your dad. You're your own dad." His voice was particularly loud, and Yi Huan instantly woke up. However, Yi Huan didn't know how to face her original father now. After all, to be honest, she had no relationship with anyone in this world. Yi Weiguo knew that his woman had suffered a lot from being thin and small, with waxy yellow skin and slender hair. The previous investigation results had already been released. If it weren't for knowing that this mistake was an accident, Yi Weiguo wouldn't have known what he would have done. After all, his well-behaved daughter had been treated like that by that family in the past decade or so. Looking back now, he still couldn't hold back his fists. The woman sitting on the stool couldn't help but shed tears, while a graceful young girl whispered beside her. Huan looked at them curiously, speculating in her heart that the two of them should be the original cheap mother and the girl who was held the wrong way. Huan looked at the intimate appearance of the two of them, trying to ignore the sudden sour feeling. If Huan had seen this scene in person, she might have been sad. After all, compared to her father, her mother seemed to not pay as much attention to her appearance. A young man walked over and reached out his hand, saying, "Hello, my name is Minghui, and I am your second brother. Welcome home." Huan trembled and reached out his hand. Minghui felt the thick calluses on his sister's palms, and his already wavering heart finally made a decision. Minghui silently watched everything before shouting into a corner, "I haven't come over yet to see your sister." Huan looked in the direction he was speaking, and there was a young man squatting in the corner. Looking at the baby fat on his face that had not yet faded, Huan couldn't help but hold back his restless hands. Wow, he looked so good. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Attitudes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Attitudes. The young man walked over with a foul-faced expression and glared fiercely at Huan, but didn't say anything. Huan was not easy to bully either. She pretended to be scared by his gaze, trembled for a moment, and then timidly lowered her head. Sure enough, someone picked him up soon. The father and son each gave him a hand, and Minghui covered his head and let out a mournful cry. Listening to his cry, Huan's mouth slightly raised. As for the two people on the stool, Huan deliberately ignored them. After all, they didn't actively introduce themselves, so she might as well treat herself as not knowing each other, as there wouldn't be many relatives in each family. The father and son four here, along with Huan, seemed to form a small group, while Jingwen, who was still comforting her mother, couldn't sit still. Since she found out about this news, she has been unable to eat well and sleep well. After all, anyone who suddenly finds out they are not their own daughter would do this. Especially when she knows that the lives of those farmers cannot be compared to their current lives, she is extremely unwilling, and at the same time, she is complaining in her heart. If they are all wrong, why can't they not be discovered for a lifetime? She didn't want to leave here at all, but she knew that compared to her usually dignified father, the family's ears were soft, and the mother who loved face seemed to be more persuasive. So during the days when Aunt Wu went to pick someone up, she never stopped thinking about starting from her mother's side, so that she could continue to stay at this home. Jingwen has also been thinking about what kind of girl she is going to be with in her life. When she saw Huan for the first time, Jingwen felt both fortunate and somewhat unsuccessful. Having lived in this family for over a decade, Jingwen is well aware of the temperament of each member. During these few days, Jingwen has always wanted to brush off their good emotions. After all, besides her father, the two brothers are the real masters of this family. Dad is dignified but has a good personality, Mom looks gentle and actually loves Face very much. Big brother looks at Jilan Yushu, but for some reason, he subconsciously fears him. Second brother is gentle but always has a faint barrier to people, only the younger brother is not afraid, he is just a good fool. But these days, no matter how much he insinuates, Dad always shows that he will let himself go back to his true home after the girl comes back. His brother's attitude is the same as his father's, except that the second brother's attitude is not clear. As for the younger brother, he has been completely mastered by himself before, and finally his mother's attitude is left. Jingwen is very grateful that she has been performing well in the past decade or so, and can earn enough face for her mother. Otherwise, Jingwen would be afraid of being abandoned by her in the first place when this incident broke out. Previously, Jingwen only felt that her mother was a bit indecisive in handling things, but now she is really grateful that her mother has such a temperament. Indeed, after a few days of vague words, she only knows how to cry and doesn't care about her biological daughter. To be honest, Yi Jingwen felt a bit cold-blooded, as if her children were always just bringing face to her. Yi Jingwen couldn't help but feel grateful that she still seemed to be useful. Ye's mother cried for a long time but didn't see anyone else to comfort her. She looked at her husband and children not far away with tears in her eyes, watching them talk happily. As a result, she neglected herself. Ye's mother unconsciously complained in her heart about this newly found daughter. But even if she is foolish, she knows that some things are impossible to say. Yi Mu wiped away her tears with a handkerchief, stood up, and waved to Yi Huan, gesturing for her to come over. Yi Huan pretended to notice her appearance and walked over obediently. When her own daughter walked up to her and looked at her, Yi Mu's eyes unconsciously carried a hint of disgust. Yi Huan keenly noticed her disgust and unconsciously felt a chill in her heart for her original self. My biological mother was disgusted at first sight when she saw me. How sad it would be if she were here now. Ye's mother noticed that both father and son were looking at them not far away, and she reached out to hug her, but was avoided by Yi Huan. Yi Huan explained, "We're not yet familiar, I don't like strangers holding me." Upon hearing this, Ye's mother shed tears again. Perhaps there was still a hint of motherly kindness in her heart, and she covered her chest in sorrow, saying, "I am your mother. You are a piece of meat that fell from me. How could we be strangers?" Yi Huan watched as she remained silent, and Yi Jingwen quickly helped her aside. Yi Weiguo frowned when he saw his wife's appearance and said, "All right, Xiaohuan has just returned. It's natural for us to be unfamiliar. If you want to hold your daughter, you can spend more days at home with her. When you get to know her, it will be better. As for crying again, don't you? The doctors have all said that you should cry less. Why do children still like to cry when they are so old?" Ye's mother leaned against Yi Jingwen and said reproachfully, "If only I had been more careful back then. My dear daughter, you have really suffered so many years." Yi Huan is still very sensitive to human emotions. She looks at a woman in front of her who is constantly blaming herself. Although she feels sad from her, there seems to be a hint of fear mixed in with her sadness. Why is she afraid? However, Yi Huan didn't think much. After all, they hadn't interacted much with each other and thought it was because she had just traveled through time, so her ability didn't recover particularly sensitively. In the end, it was only by coaxing the father and son together that they could coax the person well, but Yi Huan felt that this cheap mother didn't seem to be very close to her. However, Yi Huan was not particularly sad either. After all, she had a happy life before, and her father loved her mother. Even if she suddenly had to recognize another parent, she could not accept it so easily. After persuading his wife, he looked at the girl sitting on the chair with her head down and playing with her fingers, wanting to tell her about the future. However, the atmosphere was not the right time to talk about these things, so he could only reluctantly pinch his brows. Just as Yi Weiguo didn't know what to say, his wife suddenly hugged Yi Jingwen and said, "I can't bear to part with you, Jingwen." Yi Huan was startled by her sudden voice, and Yi Weiguo thought she was scared. He said, "Yi Mingji, Yi Minggao, and Yi Minghui, take your sister upstairs to see the new room first. I have something else to discuss with your mother. Jingwen, you also go up. The atmosphere is a bit strange now, and they know it's not suitable to stay here." So Yi Mingji took his sister's bundle and said, "Sister, I'll take you to see your new room first. You'll be staying in this room from now on. If you have anything you don't like, you can tell me and I'll help you replace it." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Visiting Rooms. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Visiting Rooms. After all the children left, Yi Weiguo, the father of Yi, looked at his wife who was starting to cry again with a headache in front of him. He really didn't understand why she had changed her mind now, even though they had discussed well before. Yi Muying wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief and said, "Yes, I know it's my fault this time, but before we started, we discussed arranging for Jingwen to return to her family after our own daughter returned. But haven't the previous investigation results come out yet? Now that she's out, take a look. Even our biological daughter looks like this. If Jingwen goes back, wouldn't it be like a sheep in a tiger's mouth? I know Jingwen is not our biological daughter, but she has also lived with us for so many years. I have raised her for so long, how could I even push her to jump out of it knowing it was not a good place, or even a fire pit? Yi Weigua said. Even if we don't send her home, we can still let her live outside. Why do you have to let her stay? What do you think of Huan? The expression in Ainan's eyes, which were covered by a handkerchief, was unclear. Yi Weigua patiently advised his wife, you said that Jingwen has been with us for so many years. Yes, I admit it's hard to let go, but we need to distinguish between priorities. Only our daughter has suffered in this matter. Can't you take a look at our daughter just after she returned and think about the situation we investigated? Can't you feel sorry for her? Didn't you say before that she was a piece of meat that fell off your body? Yes, I know that people's hearts are biased. It's not wrong for you to have a bias towards Jingwen, but you shouldn't have shown that attitude on the first day our daughter just returned. Yi Weigua became increasingly popular as he spoke. He was not sure how a well-behaved wife could not distinguish between them in this matter. Ainan remained silent, only sobbing softly. Yi Weigua and his wife discussed again, but seeing her completely incomprehensible attitude was also a headache. Upstairs, Yi Minghui and his 3 brothers are taking Yi Huan to observe her new room. Yi Jingwen feels a bit uncomfortable, but now her parents have an unclear attitude, so she can only be considered quiet. However, Yi Jingwen is very unwelcome to Yi Huan's arrival, and has cursed in her heart more than once why she needs to be found and why this matter needs to be discovered. Yi Jingwen is still cursing his biological mother in his heart, which is the culprit revealed after the investigation. Yi Jingwen even complained a bit dark about why she didn't solve Yi Huan in the first place. If she wasn't there, there was a high chance she would stay, not like being completely in a passive state now. No, I can't be so passive anymore. I must find a way to stay. She doesn't want to become like Yi Huan in the future. When she arrived on the 2nd floor, Yi Jingwen coldly said, I'm back in my room. Then she walked in and closed the door in one go. Compared to the sister who was found back, Yi Minghui is still closer to Yi Jingwen. Although he understood that Yi Huan was his own sister, he still had some resistance towards her. He awkwardly said, I'll go back to my room and then leave. Yi Minghui and Yi Minggao were afraid that their younger sister might think too much and said, it's okay. Shall we may not be able to accept it at once, but don't be afraid. There's also us. Let's take you on a tour of your next room first. If you think anything is not suitable, you can speak up and we can make changes together. Yi Huan nodded. Later, led by these 2 cheap brothers, Yi Huan visited the room she was going to stay in. The room is not big, definitely not comparable to her previous room, but she has looked at the houses in this courtyard before, and they have many families. The house covers a small area, and most people live on the 2nd floor. Therefore, apart from them, this house is no longer small. Moreover, Yi Huan observed that the blankets on the bed and the clothes inside the cabinet were all new, but the colors seemed too bright. Yi Minghui looked at his younger sister staring at the quilt and thought she liked it very much. He said, how about it? Do you like it? I personally went to the supply and marketing agency to choose this color. Yi Huan nodded hesitantly as she looked at the bright colors of the quilt. Yi Minggao said, Sister, take a look at these again. I have arranged them for you. Yi Huan nodded and said, Thank you, 2 brothers. Yi Minghui carefully placed the bundle in his hand on the table and asked, Do you like this room, sister? Is there anything you don't like? Yi Huan shook her head. There were very few decorations in the room, only a bed, a wardrobe, a table, and a chair. However, Yi Huan, who had read many representative novels, knew that in this era, such furniture was already very good. Little did she know that the dowry for marriage now was only 30.6 legs. 36 legs refer to a wardrobe, a cabinet, a table, 4 chairs, and a bed. In modern times, it may seem very simple and easy to obtain, but in this era where everything requires tickets and the average salary is not yet over 40, the dowry of 36 legs still has to be a small 200. Not to mention those who have non-city household registration, they may not earn 50 yuan all year round despite their hard work. However, the furniture in their room is already sufficient, and of course, it cannot be ruled out that their cheap father and mother's salary is high. After all, I haven't been able to figure out what my cheap dad is with Aunt Wu even by insinuating before. After visiting the room, Yi Mingji and his younger brother shared some basic information about the family, fearing that his younger sister would not know anything and would feel uncomfortable if she made a mistake. A family, everywhere, with different attitudes. After lunch, the family gathered at the table. But the atmosphere was strange, and no one spoke, eating obediently. Yi Huan, not to mention, was already hungry and solved lunch in a gentle but extremely fast way. The others on the table were all shocked and only looked at her. Yingyan felt a bit conflicted with the daughter she had found. Watching her eat, she felt like she was starving to death and reincarnated. Looking at Yi Jingwen beside her, she looked down on her, but it didn't show on the surface. Yi Weiguo watched as she ate so much, afraid that she might not be feeling well. He quickly stopped and said, "It's okay, we can all have enough to eat in the future, but don't just hold on." At the same time, his heart was even more sorrowful. If he had been with his wife, wouldn't his daughter have suffered so many difficulties? Aunt Wu came forward and explained, "Weiguo, Xiao Huan just has a big appetite. I made some extra and specially cooked some noodles. It's okay. It's not that the previous family didn't behave properly, otherwise Xiao Huan wouldn't have been so hungry." The other few people stopped saying anything as they looked at Yi Huan, but it was possible that Yi Huan was eating too well. In the end, except for Yingyan, most of them ate more than usual. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Expressing Position. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Expressing Position. After dinner, Yi Weiguo finally held a family meeting. After all, in his current position, he doesn't have to rest every day, and later he entered a busy period. Therefore, in order to express his attitude in public for his newly found biological daughter. He has seen so many people, but he has to admit that human hearts are the most difficult to control. Now that my daughter has just returned, I may have to be busy with work in the future. It seems that my daughter-in-law is a bit confused now, and what should I do with this girl, Jingwen? It is indeed necessary to discuss it carefully, and the most important thing is to instruct those 3 stinky kids to take good care of their younger sister. Yi Weiguo signaled to Aunt Wu to clean up the kitchen first, and Aunt Wu also knew that the current scene was not what she should be waiting for. Yi Weiguo sat upright on the sofa and said, "First of all, I don't care what you think. Yi Huan is my biological daughter, and that's a part of this family. Previously, she left our family for so many years due to a mistake, but now that she has been found back, we must say goodbye to her past completely. In the future, Yi with the surname Yi Huan will be from Yi Weiguo. Yi Mingji, Yi Minggao, as the eldest and second brothers, you too should remember to care for and take care of your younger sister. Although you are the younger brother, Yi Minghui's sister has suffered a lot from this crisis. In the future, you also need to remember to care for and take care of her." Have you 3 heard this? Yi Minggao and Yi Mingji had already had a favorable impression of this retrieved biological sister, so they naturally agreed to it in one fell swoop. But Yi Minghui felt that his father's statement on the spot was too unfair to Yi Jingwen. After all, it was not what she wanted this to happen. She made a mistake in her previous life, why did she have to accommodate her? But his father's accumulated power was too strong, and he dared not resist. After all, in this family, he really knows how to take action. Yi Jingwen lowered her head and clenched her fists tightly, preventing her angry expression from being noticed. The pain of her nails piercing into her flesh kept her briefly awake. Anan still wanted to speak, but Yi Weiguo knew that his wife had been feeling unwell lately, and his brain seemed to be a bit off. He didn't even feel pain for his own daughter anymore, afraid that she would say something that hurt Yi Huan's heart. He quickly spoke up in front of her. Afterwards, it's about the issue of Jingwen. In theory, what happened in the previous generation should not be related to you. But I am a father, and although your biological mother does not admit this, and I do not have enough evidence to accuse her, she is still the culprit who caused my daughter's suffering here. Anger is certain. I am not a saint, so what will you do next? Do you have any ideas on your own? I don't know either, maybe I'll go back to that mountain village, Yi Jingwen said with a trembling voice. Yi Weiguo frowned and said, I advise you not to go back to that mountain village. After all, your biological mother can do such a thing. It's uncertain what kind of psychology she has, but her abuse of Huan is real. Although I did vent my anger on you, I didn't know it was a pit of fire and push you inside. Anan interjected, Old Yi, can't we let Jingwen continue to stay in this house? Jingwen has been living with me for over a decade, and how can I accept such a thing happening all of a sudden? And Jingwen is only so old, how can she live alone outside? As he spoke, tears involuntarily welled up again, and Yi Weiguo felt a headache as he watched his wife cry again. Yi Jingwen knew that now her only reliance was on her mother. Yi Weiguo looked at the two women leaning against each other, his expressionless daughter on the side, and asked, Huan, do you want to change your name? Yi Huan shook her head. After all, she used to call her by this name in her previous life, and now she still calls her by this name. She felt that it might be a kind of fate. Anyway, this name was not chosen by those unscrupulous parents, and she didn't have any small bumps in her heart. Yi Weiguo shook his head and said, since you don't want to change it, let's call it this name in the future. Joyful, I hope you will live happily every day in the future. Originally, Yi Weiguo wanted Jingwen to go out and find a place to live, but it's hard to say what his wife looks like now. After asking Huan and confirming that she doesn't care, Yi Jingwen stayed temporarily. In the evening, Yi Weiguo took a large box, which contained a lot of money and tickets. Yi Huan had to admit that the first person to see these was indeed surprised. Yi Weiguo. Huan, you can keep these tickets and money for now. Dad may be very busy in the coming period. Your older brother and second brother also have a job and are not usually at home. Your mother has been a bit confused lately. She doesn't love you, but she hasn't come out of the dead end yet and can't accept this news. But don't be afraid that she loves you. Dad, your brothers, and your younger brother all love you. You have to believe that you are a beloved child. Yi Weiguo doesn't usually talk as much, but since he found out that his daughter was picked up the wrong way since childhood and didn't have a good day, he found someone to talk to. I heard that he used to study psychology, especially emphasizing that children's psychology is very important, especially for those who have just returned home. There was no other way, but Yi Weiguo, a usually carefree man, approached him several times. Yi Huan didn't expect her cheap father to be so inconsistent on the outside. Although he appears to be a tall and robust man, his mind is so delicate. It has to be said that Yi Huan was touched at this moment. Yi Huan touched the box and asked, are you really good at giving me so much money and tickets all at once? Yi Weiguo gestured and said, I earn money just for my children and daughter. Law. Originally, I wanted your mother to give you these money and tickets, but because of Jingwen's problem, she didn't know how to contact you at once, so I decided to send them myself. Remember to put them away. By the way, your grandparents are a bit far away. I'll take you back to visit them when I'm on vacation. As for what happens to your grandparents, it depends on how your mother arranges then. Anyway, all you need to remember is that you are my daughter from Yi Weiguo, so don't be afraid of others. After Yi Weiguo left, his twin brothers also came over. The two of them didn't talk much, but the three of them behaved the same. They all came to send money and tickets to him. Looking at the money and tickets given by the three people, Huan doubted for a moment whether her previous guess was wrong. After all, the sum of the three people's money was almost 140 yuan, not to mention some miscellaneous tickets. The total value is estimated to exceed 200 yuan. It's enough for a family of 6 to live well. In the evening, Huan finally saw her true self, but she also developed a high fever as a result. Her memories of this period were completely forgotten by Huan after waking up, and even her memories of her past life were blurred for the most part. Her integration with this world was better, but she remembered things she had space for firmly. Wishing everyone a happy National Day. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Breakfast. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Breakfast. What are you doing here early in the morning? It's too noisy, people can't even sleep. Mu said in an unhappy mood. Huan has also become accustomed to it. Perhaps she may not have a motherly relationship in her lifetime. Since she was found back, this mother's attitude towards her has not been very close, and she will actually like Yi Jingwen even more. However, Huan now has a father who loves her and a brother who loves her. It is not impossible to miss her one love, and she is not really a teenage girl. How could she still crave maternal love? Despite this, Huan politely shouted, "Good morning, Mom." At least the most basic etiquette needs to be explained. After all, one cannot be caught by others. What's good? I'm not good at all. Mu's face was particularly ugly. Huan rolled her eyes behind her back. Since her father left, this mother's attitude towards her has become worse. Huan couldn't understand either. Did she do something that was extremely angry and resentful towards her? Why do you have such a bad attitude towards her? Unfortunately, she had been crying and claiming that she was the flesh that had fallen from her body before. It seems that this flesh is not very precious, is it? Is it difficult because there are already substitutes around? Huan is not someone to be bullied by others. If she is not good to herself, then I will not treat her as well, even though she is my own mother. Huan politely asked, "Mom, do you want to have breakfast?" As soon as Ye's mother thought about old Ye's attitude before leaving, she wanted to curse. This daughter who had just been found would indeed restrain herself. Not only did she let old Ye take a large amount of money and tickets from her, but she also made him less concerned about himself. His mouth was full of this annoying ghost. Ye's mother was about to curse, but there was noise coming from the stairwell. She instantly changed her face and asked, "What breakfast do you have today?" Huan casually said, "Noodles." After seeing her eldest son at the staircase, Mu said gently, "Minghui, why do you wake up so early? Don't you sleep a little longer?" Minghui nodded at his mother and said, "Don't sleep, Mom. I've been busy with work lately, so it's better for me to go to work early." Ye's mother is particularly kind to her eldest son who is excellent and can earn face for herself. After all, many people outside envy her for having such an eldest son. When I was a student, I excelled in my studies. Now that I am working, I also have excellent abilities. I heard that I am highly valued by my leaders. There are even many people who come to explore themselves and want to be in-laws with them. Ye's mother agreed and said, right, work is important. Your sister made breakfast, you can eat some before leaving." Minghui nodded and walked into the kitchen, looking at his busy sister who was concerned and saying, "Why doesn't she sleep a little longer? Actually, you don't have to wake up so early to make breakfast for home. Don't work so hard when you go home now." Huan looked at the boiling soup in the pot and said without looking back, "I'm used to it, I can't sleep anymore." Listening to these words, Minghui became even more affectionate towards his younger sister. Minghui said, "You had a high fever a few days ago, and if you're feeling unwell, just say it out loud. But don't just endure it, you know." Huan. "Big brother, don't worry, I'm not so foolish. And I exercise every day, don't worry. By the way, big brother, have you found the books and materials I asked you to look for before? Minghui helped her set up the bowl and said, I can bring it back to you today. Huan has never attended school, but she feels that she must study. Reading is very useful, so she asked her elder brother Minghui to help her collect some elementary school textbooks and materials. She wants to read. Minghui agrees and supports his sister's eagerness to learn. Quickly, the other few people also came down, and Mu didn't show any courtesy to Huan. She directly asked her to move more quickly. Minghui spoke up and said, Mom, Huan is already very fast. Can you ask Minghui to help with the bowl? Since Huan's high fever subsided, she slowly started cooking 3 meals a day. At first, Ye's mother didn't quite agree. After all, she thought that Huan, who grew up in the countryside, could have any good skills. However, looking at the expectant eyes of her eldest and second sons, Ye's mother couldn't refuse. I can only secretly hope in my heart that she will cook poorly and come down when the time comes. But who knew that her craftsmanship was really good? Although she couldn't compare to the craftsmanship of the masters in the big restaurants outside, she was already considered very good compared to ordinary people. But it's just a bit too extravagant, using much more oil than before. Ye's mother wanted to seize this opportunity and make her give up, but the thought of deteriorating food in the future made her heart even more angry. I can only say a few bad things while my son is not around. But Huan didn't take her to heart at all, and he just pretended to be uncomfortable with what she said, completely ignoring her in his heart. But when Mu saw her uncomfortable expression, she felt good in her heart and would say a few words every time. If there were a third person around, I wouldn't have guessed that the two were actually mother and daughter. Looking at the simple cooking of noodles, although I don't care much about my tongue and it's not my first time eating them, I have to admit that my sister's craftsmanship is really good. Even Minghui, who is not very close, always eats a full bowl with embarrassment. Perhaps because of eating someone else's soft talk, Minghui no longer had hostility towards her at first, at most he just didn't pay much attention to her. Huan lowered her head and ate her own noodles. It was really delicious by herself. Aunt Wu had done a little too little before. It was totally plain water-boiled noodles or congee. To be honest, although Huan was a southerner in her last life, she really didn't like congee in the morning, so after eating congee for several times, she still felt that she had enough food and clothing. Huanxin was thinking in her heart whether she would wake up early next time and buy more bones to come back and cook soup. After all, bone soup and noodles are really fragrant. After being cooked, sprinkle a handful of scallions on them, and the taste is even more wonderful. But it's not easy to buy scallions now. How about growing some by yourself? At the dinner table, Yi Jingwen was eating noodles absent-mindedly. Although others were enjoying them, she felt extremely bitter. Seeing Huan becoming more and more popular at home, Yi Jingwen felt increasingly uncomfortable day by day. But she can't cook, how can she earn money from her? Yi Jingwen glanced at Huan, who was eating noodles with her head down, and said, Sister, eat slowly, be careful not to choke. Huan lifted her head in confusion. Ye's mother looked at Huan's expression and said somewhat disdainfully, It's not like you can't eat enough at home. Why are you eating so quickly? Mom! Minghui shouted. Mingao also spoke up and said, Mom, eating noodles in large bites feels more fragrant. Do you want to give it a try? Do you have it? Minghui was a bit restless. After all, although this biological sister looked a bit unattractive, I have to say that her craftsmanship is really good. Listening to his brother's words, Minghui came out without considering that his brother was lying. Listening to his words, he took a big bite and indeed felt even more fragrant. Due to his busy mouth, Minghui could only give a thumbs up in agreement. Ye's mother looked at her 3 sons leaning towards Huan, feeling full of anger in her heart. She said, You're full. Then she left the table. Yi Minghui couldn't feel the strange atmosphere and casually said, "Mom, why are you eating so little today?" End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Reading. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 8. Reading. Ye's mother was also angry when she saw her youngest son who was completely out of condition. Among her 3 sons, he was the least deserving. It's okay if her studies don't compare to his older brothers, and she doesn't stand out in any other aspects. She also likes to cause trouble for her, and I don't know how many things she handled when she was a child. Now that she's grown up, she doesn't necessarily get any better. She spends her days fooling around with his friends. If she hadn't seen her give birth to him with her own eyes, she would have really doubted whether he was her own biological child. How could he be completely different from his 2 brothers? Yimu said coldly, "I don't have a good appetite. By the way, school is about to start soon. How are you doing with your homework?" Yi Minghui immediately lowered his head to eat noodles. "Oh, the noodles are so delicious, and the soup is also delicious." Ye's mother didn't know anything else. As soon as she thought about the new school teacher coming to the office to find her and the discussions of other colleagues, she felt a headache. She said, "Don't go out for me until you finish your homework, or I'll have your father clean you up. Every time school starts, it gives me a headache." What a big person. After finishing speaking, I turned around and wanted to leave. Suddenly, something came to my mind and I turned around and said, "Don't ask your friends for help. Yi Huan, keep an eye on your brother for your mother." Ah. Ah. The first one comes from Yi Huan, and the last one comes from Yi Minghui. Yi Huan didn't understand, so she just had a good breakfast and provoked everyone. Yi Minghui, on the other hand, completely cannot accept his mother's sudden concern. Yi Mingji also chimed in and said, "Minghui, your studies should be taken seriously. You are so old that it's not easy for us to keep worrying. Huan, don't you happen to be studying? Although Xiaowei is younger than you, you don't have much foundation. You can ask him when Xiaowei is resting." Yi Huan was originally trying to find an excuse for himself. It's not easy for him to keep reading, and the tools he sent to him are useless. Yi Minghui, on the other hand, was somewhat unhappy, but he was both respectful and afraid of his elder brother, and dared not refute him. He had to figure out in his heart how to let Yi Huan help him avoid this matter. Yi Jingwen saw that none of them had mentioned herself and said, "Xiao Huan, if you have any academic questions, you can also come and ask me. I'm not that busy." Yi Minghui had an idea and was about to speak when Yi Mingji interrupted him and said, "It's impossible." Yi Minghui said discontentedly, "Big brother, you don't even know what I'm going to say, why did you refuse?" Yi Mingji said, "Because I understand Jingwen, I disagree with letting Jingwen keep an eye on you." Yi Jingwen looked at her elder brother's serious expression and dared not speak up to help. "I have no choice but to be suppressed by my elder brother. If Yi Minghui doesn't accept it, he will have to accept it." After finishing the meal, Yi Huan took out 2 packed lunch boxes and handed them to big brother and second brother respectively, saying, "These are some small dishes I have prepared. Big brother and second brother can take them to work to eat. Just heat them up for lunch, it's very convenient." Yi Mingji did not take it over immediately, but said, "If there is anything delicious, just keep it for yourself to eat at home. Your second brother and I can eat in the cafeteria at work, and the food in the cafeteria is still acceptable." Yi Minggao didn't take it either. Yi Huan said, "It's okay, I also left some for lunch, and we have it too." Yi Minghui, not afraid of being beaten, quickly grabbed a box and opened it, exclaiming, "Is it so beautiful?" The other 3 also looked over, looking at the neatly arranged and brightly colored dishes in the lunch box. Yi Minggao and Yi Mingji couldn't help but feel very comfortable in their hearts. After all, although they should treat their younger sister well, they would feel even happier when their younger sister treats them well. Yi Huan said, "This is a potato pancake, and this is the meat from the bones. I added some seasoning and stir-fried it for a while. This is some black fungus that I flipped over in the kitchen. I made you a cold mixed black fungus shred. You can eat it later and give me some advice. I'll see if I can improve it. Yi Minghui touched Yi Huan's head and said, "Thank you, little sister." Yi Minggao nodded silently, but his movements were not slow. He quickly snatched the lunch box from his younger brother's hand. Looking at her siblings who were talking and laughing, Yi Jingwen couldn't say she wanted to cook. After all, she didn't know how to cook, and she didn't like it either. After all, she thought it was easy to find a good family to marry with her external conditions. Although she is still studying now, due to this incident, she has felt a sense of crisis and started planning for the future. Getting married is naturally the top priority. After all, my mother has told her more than once about the importance of marrying a good family. Thinking of this, Yi Jingwen cursed Yi Huan again in anger. After all, if it weren't for his appearance, she would still be the biological daughter of the Yi family, and the family conditions of the family she would marry in the future would definitely be better. I am currently in high school, and as long as I am admitted to college, I will definitely immediately find a faraway school to study at, so that I don't have to worry about not having a good candidate in college. With this in mind, Yi Jingwen suddenly felt a sense of crisis and left eagerly, saying, "I'm going back to my room to read." Yi Minghui and Yi Minggao saw that time was running out, and after explaining to their younger siblings, they also left with their lunch boxes. There are 2 siblings left in the living room. Yi Huan didn't hesitate and pointed to the kitchen, saying, "You go wash the dishes." "Why?" Yi Minghui said defiantly. Yi Huan said, "Just because breakfast was made by me." "Cut, I can also cook." Yi Minghui said displeased. Yi Huan looked at him with some suspicion and said, "Really?" Yi Minghui confidently said, "What's the difficulty of cooking? Isn't it just about having hands?" Yi Huan looked at him confidently and said, "Okay, you can make the lunch for lunch." Yi Minghui stopped talking in an instant. Although he said it well, he was really afraid of being asked to do it. But for the sake of his own face, Yi Minghui didn't say a word, snorted coldly, and walked into the kitchen with a stiff neck. Yi Huan has already packed everything up. She thinks that washing dishes is such a simple matter that she shouldn't have to worry about anymore, so Yi Huan took a primary school textbook and started reading it. In her opinion, the content in the textbook was relatively simple. The more Yi Huan read it, the more she felt that she seemed a bit smart. Otherwise, how could she understand so quickly? But Yi Huan won't be blindly confident either. She plans to ask her brothers to do some exercises for her to test. The most important thing now is writing. I didn't know how to write before, but her handwriting has been specially practiced before. Not to mention how excellent it is, but it has already made some progress. At first glance, it is not something that beginners can write. Another important thing is that there is still a field of politics. Learning some of the current concepts may not appear until later in primary school, but Yi Huan thinks it is very important and seems to be very useful in the future, so she studies very seriously. When Yi Minghui washed the dishes and came out, he saw his sister sitting upright on a chair reading a book. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Stimulated Yi Minghui. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Stimulated Yi Minghui. Among the 4 children in the family, Yi Minghui is the one who knows how to read the least and has been contacted by parents the most. In fact, Yi Minghui was not like this when he was young, but for some reasons, he lost his liking and love for learning. The sister who has finally been retrieved has never read a book, and the fact that she has finally risen is that their thoughts as companions are also on the verge of collapse. Yi Minghui gritted his teeth and walked over, bending over and saying, "Hey, can you read?" Yi Huan had noticed him before and thought he was going to do something, but when she asked such a question, she was too lazy to bother him and said, "There's a dictionary." Yi Minghui saw that she didn't want to talk to him, but instead became more and more determined. He said, "No, you still have to look through the dictionary. You probably don't even know the most basic words. Yi Huan admitted directly, after all, she is a big illiterate now. Although it can be pretended to be unforgettable, it is not conducive to future learning. It is still safe to take it slowly. Yi Minghui admitted to being somewhat unhappy when he saw her so readily, and pushed her with his elbow, saying, "How about we discuss it?" Yi Huan didn't look up and said, "What's going on?" Yi Minghui said, "I taught you how to read, how about you help me cover up?" Taking cover. Yi Minghui thought she couldn't understand and explained, "Oh my, it's just asking you not to listen to what big brother and mom say and just stare at me doing homework." "No way. Why not? Why don't you want me to keep an eye on you?" Yi Huan raised her head and asked. Looking at her bright eyes, Yi Minghui felt embarrassed to say that he wanted to borrow his friend's answer. Yi Minghui tried to persuade, "Don't worry about the reason yet, can you just say it's okay?" Yi Huan glanced up and down at him, then shook her head and said, "You seem to be studying very poorly. I'll wait for my older brother to come back from work and teach me." Yi Minghui felt her distrust and said, "What kind of expression are you looking at? Also, my studies are not so bad that I can't teach you elementary school knowledge. I'm currently a junior high school student and I'm about to go to high school. But isn't there an exam in high school?" Upon hearing her words, Yi Minghui understood what she meant. She didn't believe she could get into high school. Yi Minghui was instantly motivated, admitting that he was not outstanding, but for him, taking the high school entrance exam was still achievable with anger. Yi Huan said, "Don't lie to me just because I haven't read much. People who can get into high school are really impressive, you." Yi Minghui exclaimed, "No matter what, I am better than you. You, who didn't even attend elementary school, can tell me that I am a middle school student." Yi Huan looked at him and readily admitted, saying, "Yeah. I didn't go to elementary school." Yi Minghui looked into her eyes and instantly felt that he might have said too much. After all, the reason why she didn't read was not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. Noticing her rough hands holding the book, Yi Minghui couldn't say anything for a moment. The living room instantly quieted down. Yi Minghui looked at her with his head down and didn't speak, thinking that his words were too extreme and a bit awkward. However, he couldn't say anything when asked to apologize. Yi Minghui glanced at her several times and saw that she ignored him. He felt like he was on pins and needles, unable to do anything but go up and start working on a workbook in his hand. When Ye's mother finished packing up, she found that the two of them were quietly doing something. Ye's mother looked at her son's rare obedience and said, "Minghui is really good this time. When mom comes back, she will buy you roast duck to eat." When Yi Minghui saw his mother not even mentioning the person around him, he felt uncomfortable and said, "Where else is she?" Yi Mu casually asked, "Huan has also performed well. What do you want?" Listening to her casual questioning, it was like sending a kitten or puppy away. Yi Huan had no waves in her heart, but the cheap didn't take advantage of it. Yi Huan said, "Buy some books." Seeing her so eager to learn, it's rare for Yi Mu, who didn't really like her, to have no objection. As for whether her attitude would hurt her, Yi Mu doesn't care at all. After all, she is her mother, and if it's difficult, I have to go and accommodate her. After readily agreeing, he left. Yi Huan looked at her departing figure and asked, "What is she going for?" Yi Minghui didn't notice that she didn't call her mother and said, "Go to work, after all, school is about to start soon, and the school should also start getting busy." After Yi Huan couldn't see her back, she lowered her head and stopped talking. Perhaps due to boredom, or perhaps because what he said before was not very pleasant to listen to, Yi Minghui insisted on teaching her to recognize a lot of words and calculations this morning. Although Yi Huan controlled his performance, Yi Minghui couldn't help but feel jealous of her when he thought about his childhood grades and looked at the grass paper in his hand. It's unreasonable. What's going on in this family? No matter how powerful the brothers are, why is this uneducated sister so powerful? It shouldn't have been the attack on my brain that made me foolish when I was born, otherwise why was I so bad that I couldn't even compare to her? Yi Minghui was a bit dazed, and Yi Huan noticed his expression. She thought she had exposed some kind of mischief and nervously asked, "What's wrong? Did I perform poorly?" Mainly, Yi Huan doesn't know how the current level of education is. After all, this is the capital, and the educational conditions are definitely better than other places. Maybe the students here have good academic performance. Very bad. Yi Minghui didn't even know what to say when he heard her say, but he couldn't foolishly praise your excellent performance, could he? How could it be? Saying she's excellent doesn't mean he has to admit that he's the worst in this family. With a stern expression, Yi Minghui said, "It's very poor, but you still have a lot of room for improvement. After all, you can only make 4 mistakes in such a simple 10 questions. It's really not right. It's really bad, it's the worst student I've ever seen." He shook his head regretfully. Yi Huan listened with half a doubt, but she thought of the enrollment rates of those capital schools in the future. It was normal for students in the capital to perform well. After all, this is the capital of a country. Seeing Yi Huan's humble acceptance on his face, Yi Minghui felt a bit guilty, but the more he felt guilty, the more he showed a sense of righteousness. So, Yi Huan, who originally wanted to hide her clumsiness, didn't have much understanding of the current education situation. Can't she perform better when he fools her like this? Even if someone exposes me, I won't be too embarrassed then. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Changes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Changes. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, a month passed. During this month, Yi Huan started a regular lifestyle, exercising early every day. After exercising, she started making breakfast, followed by reading and exercising in the morning, practicing calligraphy, doing exercises, and exercising in the afternoon. Persistence is victory, and now Yi Huan is no different from before. In the past, Yi Huan's hair was withered, yellow, and dry, her skin was waxy yellow and even slightly black, and her figure was very dry and without any flesh. She was also a bit lacking in confidence. But now, Yi Huan not only has a healthy body, but also has grown a bit. With better living conditions, her skin has a faint blush. Although her face is not particularly fair, it is better than being full of collagen. She is a lively young girl, and can be considered a beauty. The combination of exercise, self-discipline, and a little bit of spiritual spring water has caused Yi Huan's current transformation. However, what impressed Yi Huan the most was her pair of eyes, which were particularly bright, as if there were stars living inside her eyes. Moreover, during this month, Yi Huan not only had a clear understanding of the surrounding environment, but also had a clear understanding of some basic things, and was no longer afraid to show any signs of wrongdoing when encountering problems. And after a month of getting along, the relationship with her family has become closer, excluding those who do not have a good impression of her. As for Aunt Wu, who had to return to her hometown to take care of her postpartum daughter-in-law due to family reasons, and some external factors, Aunt Wu will not come back this time. Yi Minghui took the initiative to pay her an extra month's salary, which can be considered as the end of her years of relationship. But due to Aunt Wu's departure, there was no one in charge of household chores and 3 meals a day at home. Yi Huan just enjoys the process of cooking, but that doesn't mean she has to willingly accept the process of cooking every day. Whether she can do it or not is her ability, but that doesn't mean she has to take on the responsibility. Ye's mother witnessed Yi Huan's changes day by day. She, who had always loved face, saw that Yi Huan was slowly taking action now, and her attitude towards her was not as resistant as it was at first. Occasionally, she would also care about her. Yi Huan still maintains her previous attitude, seemingly insignificant on the surface, but in reality, she does not take her to heart. They only maintain a superficial harmony. As for Yi Jingwen, she is the person who can't stand Yi Huan getting better. After all, the more excellent Yi Huan is, the less attention she will have on her. Yi Jingwen could clearly feel that Ye's mother cared less about her. Although Yi Jingwen didn't care much about whether she cared about her or not, she still relied on her to stay in this home. Therefore, Yi Jingwen attached great importance to Ye's mother's views. But now Yi Huan is completely indifferent to her, and she has to go to school during the day. When she comes back home after dinner, there is already someone at home. She can't possibly speak ill of her, at most only a few times. Here, Yi Huan became the shopkeeper after she ate the xiaolongbao and congee she made. Although others can go to school or work to eat, the breakfast outside not only doesn't taste as good as Yi Huan's, but also requires money to give tickets. After all, fools know how to choose. In order to solve their future food problems, they specially held a family meeting. After all, eating the cafeteria all the time is not a solution, and they are not homeless. But not everyone is this type of person, let alone 4 people with jobs and 2 people studying. The final decision was to temporarily assign Yi Huan to be responsible for 3 meals a day. Correspondingly, everyone else needs to fulfill her wish, and all expenses during this period will be covered by her mother. This time will last for a month, during which everyone will learn to cook and stir-fry. Because it was difficult for Ye's father to have a vacation, Yi Huan suddenly obtained 5 wishes, but of course, Ye's mother and Yi Jingwen were not very willing. After all, in Ye's mother's view, she is her own daughter, and she raised her. Isn't it appropriate for her to cook for herself? Why do I have to fulfill her one wish? But when faced with her words, Yi Huan completely ignored and laughed, not relying solely on her for support, but also hoping to repay her for only a short time without success. Yi Minghui also knew that his mother and sister were not harmonious, and in order to maintain family harmony, he had to balance them. However, seeing the 2 of them only become superficial mothers and daughters, Yi Minghui also had a headache. Because of this matter, Ye's mother started to dislike her again. She started ordering under the banner that she was responsible for breakfast. But who is Yi Huan? First of all, she has money and tickets, not subject to her constraints, not relying on her for a living. Secondly, she is not the kind of person who yearns for maternal love, completely indifferent to her views and emotions. Finally, if it weren't for treating her good father and brother well, Yi Huanli wouldn't want to talk to her. I don't know where she came from the illusion that I am the kind of person who lacks love. Funny. To be honest, Yi Huan actually enjoys the process of making delicious food very much. In the past, when she was not busy with work, she used to compare food videos and do it herself. Although she has a lot of money, Yi Huan is still a bit stingy. As someone who can do it herself and have plenty of food and clothing, she decided not to spend money on those snack shops and stalls outside. After all, first of all, it's about doing it yourself for cleanliness and hygiene. Secondly, it's about having lower costs, more items, and better value for money. Thirdly, it's about making it yourself for a more reassuring experience. After all, hex technology seemed to be all-pervasive at that time, which made people feel numb. However, taking care of this matter is not without its drawbacks. The downside is getting up early to grab groceries. Yi Huan used to read novels only to see the author briefly describe the process of grabbing vegetables, thinking that it was just like those big men and women grabbing eggs. Who knew that the discipline of buying vegetables in the capital was quite good, but the queue was a bit long, and if he went late, he could only pick the rest of the others. Fortunately, Yi Huan is accustomed to getting up early. After all, the movements she uses to exercise her body now look a bit out of place. Now Yi Huan basically wakes up, tidies up, buys groceries, exercises, goes home to make breakfast, studies, and exercises. After silently finishing breakfast, others left behind to tidy up and started preparing for work or school. Yi Jingwen looked at Yi Minghui eating slowly and shouted, "Minghui, hurry up, you're going to be late soon." Yi Minghui not only ate the steamed buns slowly but also said, "You go to school first, I'll go by myself later." Seeing that some classmates were already calling out to her outside, Yi Jingwen was too lazy to wait for him and left directly. Yi Huan looked at Yi Minghui eating steamed buns slowly and said, "If you continue to eat so slowly and leisurely, you will be late for school." Yi Minghui flattered Yi Huan and said, "Sister, do you still have this steamed bun?" As early as a month ago, Yi Huan had already won over Yi Minghui with his intelligence and good cooking skills. However, Yi Minghui still had to maintain his aloofness in front of outsiders, so he only dared to call Yi Huan sister in private. Yi Huan drank warm water slowly and said, "What's up?" Yi Minghui said, "Isn't that why all my friends want to try your craft? How could they suddenly want to taste my craft?" End of this chapter.